Video to let you all know kind of walkthrough of how to change out one of these rubber Subaru steering wheels with a leather touring model. I looked all over the internet. I can't find any videos that really explain how to do this, especially because the touring model has different controls that go on there and stuff like that, so you'll have to swap out your actual controls on your steering wheel, and there's nothing there's nothing online that I could find anyway that really goes into detail as to how to do this, especially because I had never even took an airbag off or anything like that. So I was just gonna run through a little tutorial of how exactly you do that. Working on is a 2017 Forester Premium with a 6-speed manual transmission. Not that the transmission should have a whole lot to do with it. So mine came with this rubber wheel, and I mean it's okay, but I really prefer a leather wheel. And I actually went to my Subaru dealership and I asked them if they could put a touring model wheel in, and their response was, well, your VIN number doesn't show that there's any leather wheel that can go on here, so no, we're not going to do it. So I decided to get on eBay. I found a touring wheel. The one I found has the capability of being heated. It has the heated module in it, and I'll show you that in a minute. I haven't figured that part out yet. If I do decide to actually get that to work, then I will make another video on that as well. Obviously, we need to take the battery terminals off. If you don't take the battery terminals off, there's a chance that whenever you go to unplug your airbag, it is going to go off, and that's just no good. So first things first, take out the battery terminals so that they're not on, and then we'll get in the car and actually start disassembling the steering wheel. Now that the battery is disconnected, we actually need to take the airbag off of this wheel. It's easier to show you here. I will show you in the car as well, but there's actually pins that connect in these little holes here, and you can see there's a little wire there that holds the pins in place. There's one here, here, and then one down here as well. And so if you look on the back here, there's a little hole there. There's a little hole down here, and then there's another little hole right here, and you're gonna have to take a screwdriver and push in there to just push those little wires out of the way, and the airbag will come loose. Just kind of like this. Just push that, and then it'll release that clip. And then do the same thing for the other dude. You gotta push those wires in. So I already have the leather one on mine, but I'm just showing you. I actually have to fix something here in a minute anyway. I got the bottom one there. You push on it, that comes loose. So that's the bottom one. There's one. Second one right there, and then there's the third one. This hole right back here, and the whole thing should come loose. Put your screwdriver down. Take this whole thing, it'll pull off. Be careful, there's wires on the back side of this. And that is your airbag. So to disconnect the airbag, what you're gonna have to do is you have to pull off these two connectors right here. These little yellow tabs right here are what you're gonna have to pull up on. So you'll have to get a screwdriver, flathead, pretty small one if you can, and pry up on these until they pop up a little bit, just like that. And then after you have pried up on both of those, then they should just release with a little bit of persuasion. And then be careful, that leaves one more wire. It's like a ground wire or something. I'm not sure what that wire is for, but you got to pull that off too. Be careful when you're pulling that. Do not pull this wire by the wire itself. Make sure you grab the little neck of the terminal and pull it. Otherwise, there's a chance you can actually rip the wire out of the terminal, and that's no good. You're going to have to get yourself a new terminal and strip the wire and crimp that back on if you do that. So be sure whenever you're taking this wire off, you always grab it by the neck. Being a little stubborn. Got a pair of needle nose pliers. Just be gentle when you're pulling on that. Alright, so I got that disconnected now. Now the entire airbag module should be free. Set that in the passenger seat. And now you got this whole wiring harness deal here. Now I'm not going to go through pulling this wiring harness out and putting it back in again. I've already done that. I have my original controls from my rubber steering wheel in here. I pulled the old controls out of, or the the touring controls out, and I put my controls from my steering wheel in here. And since they're my controls from my steering wheel, it'll plug straight back into this little clock spring connector here with no issue. We'll get to that more in a second though. Right now we need to actually pull the wheel itself off, and to do that we need to disconnect this clock spring connector, because that's what our controls are actually going into. So to take the nut off of your steering wheel that's holding everything on, you're going to need a small breaker bar. Mine is a 17mm socket and a small extension. So that nut right there is the only thing holding the steering wheel on. Now you notice I put a little Sharpie mark there. That lets me know where the top of the steering wheel is, because once you pull this off, you have no real way of telling which way the steering wheel is supposed to be aligned to put it back on. And that's actually what I'm in here fixing right now, because I was actually like 1 or 2 notches off when I put it back on anyway, even with this mark. So take a Sharpie from the top, make sure your wheel is lined up straight. Make sure your wheel is lined up straight, and put a little Sharpie mark on this right here. Otherwise, whenever you go to put it back on, there's a chance that you're not going to have any clue what way it's lined up. This connector right here, that's what goes to your steering wheel controls, and the steering wheel is not going to come out if that connector is plugged into your clock spring. So you just got to get up in here, and there's a little tab on the top of this. You push down, pull it out. That's all that is. Then we can go ahead and loosen up that nut. That nut should come right off after you break it loose. So after that, set that aside. Be very careful when you start to pull this off. You'll have to shake it, Jimmy, a little bit to pull it off. But once you do, this clock spring is free, and whatever you do not want this clock spring to rotate around at all. You want to keep it straight up where it is. If it makes even one full rotation around and you put the steering wheel back on, there's a chance you could bind it up whenever you're driving down the road and break the clock spring, and then all your controls are going to stop working. So don't do that. Make sure that clock spring stays in place whenever you pull this off. Just like that. So keep that straight up. And you got your steering wheel. So I'm not gonna pull all the wiring out again, but I'll show you with the other controls. These are the controls from the Touring that I took out. They're set down in here, and so on the back side, to pull these controls out, you'll have to turn the wheel over, and then this whole shroud here will actually come off. At least on the rubber one. You gotta be a little more careful. On the Touring one, it doesn't completely remove because there's actually wires down here for your heated wheel, and you don't want to break those, so it actually just kind of flips over. But once you're back here, then you'll have access to these screws that hold in your controls. There's actually only one screw for each one of these modules, and then there's a little plastic pin on here you can see as well. So the pin goes through this bottom hole here, and then there's a screw that screws into that hole on the controls, and it will be through this hole right here. So one thing I forgot to mention is that whenever you're taking this black shroud off, it doesn't just pop off. There's a couple things you have to do. You do have to take loose. There's a couple of screws. You'll find them just looking for them and trying to pull it off and seeing where it's catching. But there's at least 1 or 2 screws that you have to pull off that are screwed into the back of this shroud. And then there's also this connector right here, which is down in here usually, and that little brown part of the connector actually goes through the shroud. So you'll have to take a screwdriver on the back side and push this clip, that way you can pull it out. Shroud off, and you have taken the screws out of the back of both of these controls. Then what you can do is pay close attention to the wires that go to them. There's these little black clips here. There's another one where it was in here. Same thing on the other side. There's a clip here, a clip here. Pay close attention to how these wires are ran into those, like where at, and like how they're oriented. I would even go as far as taking a couple pictures and like pointing out like which way that the wires went into these, because you're going to have to put them back in with your controls in the exact same way. Otherwise, everything's going to be in the way when you go to put the airbag back in. So just pay close attention to what way the wires are ran in these little black clips before you pull them out. So after you are confident that you know how they went in, go ahead and just pull the wires out of the black clips, like so. And then jimmy these a little bit. There's those black pins in the back you're going to have to pull. Like I said, you had the screw out, but there's still that pin that goes through the hole, so they kind of want to stay in there. And you just have to force them a little bit and they'll pull right out. So after that, all you have to do is put your controls into the leather steering wheel. Make sure that they kind of go back into those clips. All the wiring goes back into the clips the same way. Put your controls back in. Make sure you put those screws back in. And then whatever screws you still have too, you can put your screws back into the shroud. Make sure that brown clip goes back into that hole. You will have an extra module here for your heated steering, and that brown clip, this one that I don't believe is connected to anything in my car originally, that plugs into the heated steering, which makes me believe that we can turn it on somehow, but I still have to figure that out. Once you have everything put into the leather wheel, all my wires are routed back in the way they're supposed to be. This brown wire is plugged into my heated control module down here in the underside. Then all we have to do is the exact opposite of what we did to take it off, and just put it right back on. Again, make sure this clock spring doesn't spin around any. We don't want it to go all the way around like that. Make sure it's exactly where it was when we started, and then just take and route those airbag wires right through where they were to begin with. And then this is the part you really got to pay attention to, because we had this spline right here and that little mark on there. And so the reason I'm even taking this all off again is because mine was just a little bit to the left. So when my car was going straight, I actually had the steering wheel slightly to the left. And it's kind of hard to guess where to put it back, since you're putting a new wheel on and there's no marks on the new wheel. So you just kind of have to eyeball it. I eyeballed it and it was a little off. So here I am again, taking it apart. Of course, if you're just taking this apart to realign the wheel, you don't have to pull all the connections and everything off, or not nearly as many of them. You'll still have to pull the airbag off. But I just figured I'd show everybody what I did to do this, because I couldn't find anything. Alright, so I think I got the wheel back on slightly more to the right than it was the last time from where I marked it. So hopefully this will be straight now whenever I'm driving down the road. Just a little note in case you do run into that issue where it's a little to the left or a little to the right whenever you're driving straight down the road. That's probably what it was, is that all these little splines in here, you may have just got like 1 or 2 notches off, left or right, and so you'll just have to pull the wheel back off and then turn it a little bit and push it back on and get it lined up correctly. If that happens, you might get lucky and everything is straight the first time. Put your nut back on. Alright, so now that you got the nut hand tight, you will have to torque it down. You'll need a torque wrench. I bought this one off Amazon for like $35. The torque spec for most steering wheel nuts is 29 to 36 foot-pounds of torque. I just set mine to 34, and that should be fine. Just wait till it clicks. There it is. 34 foot-pounds of torque on that. Shouldn't have any issues out of it. And then after that, the only thing you have left to connect before you put the airbag back in is your clock spring connector. Just fit it right back down in there, make sure it clicks, and we can put the airbag back in. Same deal as when you took it out. Put that ground back on. Once you got that nut back on, you can take your airbag module, plug those 2 connectors into the front of it, and make sure those yellow tabs are pushed back down and secure. Make sure that little blue ground terminal goes back on the tab where it's supposed to. Again, be careful, make sure you don't break that off. And then just take this airbag module, push it back in, and it will click in all 3 places. Just make sure it's on there, and after that, everything here should be good to go. You shouldn't have to do anything else here. All you should have to do now is reconnect the battery. tighten it back down. Alright, so there's one last thing that I really want to stress to you all. Before you go ahead and do anything else, now that you got the battery back on and everything, is because we took the battery off, and this is in a lot of newer vehicles, I know this already happened to me in the Subaru when I've taken the battery off several times, is that your automatic windows are, I don't even know how to explain it, they're out of whack, is all I can say. So the automatic windows, whenever you go to turn them, so I'm pushing that all the way down. It should automatically be rolling down and then back up, but they will not automatically roll down. And if I push on the passenger window, it doesn't move at all. Nothing. This switch has completely stopped working. So what you need to do is you need to roll them from all the way up, roll your window about halfway down, and then pull it up and hold that switch for about 10 seconds. Just keep on holding it. Now, let go, and then your auto window should work. Use the switch on the passenger door, roll it halfway down, roll it all the way back up, and when it hits the top, keep on holding the switch. Wait about 10 seconds. And then your auto window works. And that's all. Everything should be good to go. All the lights on your controls should all be on. If you want, go ahead and you can use your controls, check and make sure all your radio controls, all your cruise controls and everything still work. But other than that, everything should be good.